exposed to what is really happening over there, and exposing themselves to both sides of the story, the Israeli side and the Palestinian side. And I think when we have a better informed American citizenry, and a better informed American public, then we will be able to see a more just peace, a more just solution in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and certainly something Mark and everyone else here is working for. So for that, I definitely applaud all of you guys for that tremendous support and effort. So I think that's the general overview of the media coverage of that war, and I'd love to take any questions from anyone here, and any ideas or exchange of ideas would be great. Please, Sandy.
Has there been any other progress in getting Al Jazeera English on any other network in the United States? I think that Burlington alone with Buckeye, Ohio, for some of these kind of overseas areas.
Al Jazeera has been systematically working on that for several years. It's not for a lack of effort or trying. And certainly in the past couple of months, there have been some major breakthroughs. Al Jazeera is now broadcast in Washington, D.C. So that's a very significant step, and it's actually it's in the D.C. metropolitan area. In recent weeks, we've just actually had interviews with Defense Secretary Robert Gates. We've had interviews with Hillary Clinton. So it's amazing, as soon as people started to see it, how the perception changed of what Al Jazeera was. Donald Rumsfeld formerly said that Al Jazeera had shown beheadings of American soldiers and stuff, and never once in the almost now 13 years of Al Jazeera networks was there ever a beheading shown in Al Jazeera. But it's amazing how when one official can come out and say that very simple statement, it can create this myth all across the country. And for every American who doubts or questions Al Jazeera's motives, we now have two of the most senior officials in the U.S. government who have appeared and spoken directly to Al Jazeera English and Al Jazeera Arabic. I think that really underlines the growing momentum and change and shift towards Al Jazeera. And I think it will only continue to grow. I know there's also significant progress being made in Canada, and it's sad to say, but Al Jazeera is much more advanced in Europe and in the UK and elsewhere in the world. So it's
it's available in Israel too. Is that correct?
It is. It's widely popular in Israel. We have Israeli officials from the highest levels that have appeared on Al Jazeera. Israeli spokespeople, are always on Al Jazeera, and Israeli society always appears. We've gone to settlements. We've spoken to settlers. We've spoken to soldiers. We've spoken to human rights organizations. So there's no doubt that it enjoys a great deal of popularity and support among the Middle East, Europe, everywhere. Hopefully soon it will also across the U.S.
Sam?
How many other journalists were you with in Gaza? And maybe if you could talk about the relationship that you had with the other journalists, maybe from what other outlets they were from, and are any of them coming out speaking the same way that you are?
That's actually it's a great question, because another point after the war has always been focusing on myself and Shireen Tadros, who's also with me in Gaza. She was for Al Jazeera English reporter as well. And the focus has been on us as being like the only two English-speaking journalists in Gaza, Al Jazeera English being the only network that had a presence in Gaza. And it's slightly misleading and somewhat disrespectful to the almost 400 other journalists that were in Gaza covering it for all of the other Arab satellite channels and other news channels. And I always find that a little bit disrespectful to them to say that, in the first couple of days of the war, I'll put it in context for it, the first couple of days of the war, we were getting calls from almost every possible news organization that you can imagine, asking us to report for them, saying like, oh, can you appear? So I appeared on MSNBC, I appeared on CBC for Canada, I did stuff for television in the UK, we did radio interviews and all this stuff. And it was very mind-boggling for me to think of like, why is there such an emphasis on us being somewhat credible journalists, because I'm American, she's British, and we work for Al Jazeera and it's seen as an English language channel. But the 400 other Palestinian journalists that live in Gaza and are experiencing the war just as much as we are kind of dismissed as being either partisan, biased, unprofessional, and that was a very tragic reality. Because if there's anything, I personally drew a lot of inspiration from these journalists. In Gaza, I live alone. I don't have a family there. I'm based in Gaza, but I get sent to Gaza. I'm not from Gaza. And And for me, what was so inspiring was to see these Palestinian journalists who left their families every morning, while they were being bombarded, who had to deal with all of the pain that almost every other Palestinian family was going through, relatives being killed, homes being destroyed, farmland being completely destroyed as well. And yet, despite that, they knew what their responsibility was, and every day would come into work and every day report live just as long as Shereen and I were up standing on that rooftop and reporting. And I think, again, that's been one of the most important points since the end of the war, was that somehow there wasn't enough reporting coming out of Gaza during the war. And the reality of it is that's completely not true. Almost every Arab news channel had a presence in Gaza because they understood the importance of that story, not only to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but to the wider regional debate that takes place in the Middle East. And so it's a very important point. There were about 400 or so other journalists that were there, print, radio, broadcast, everything, you name it, they were there. And what made this particular war also unprecedented in its media coverage was the utilization of the internet and social media. Mark was saying he was watching us on livestation.com. We were also providing Twitter updates of the attacks. We were getting real-time video uploaded to our website from eyewitnesses, from Palestinians, essentially eye-reporting, and using their cell phones to get the footage out. And that gave us unprecedented access, because in previous occasions where journalists were somewhat immune and had the ability to move to the front lines of the war, in this case we didn't have that immunity. Journalists were being killed, media buildings had been hit by the Israeli military, so there was really no safe area. And getting that material from civilians, from residents, was very important to give us a reality of what was happening all across the Gaza Strip, because the Israeli military divided Gaza into two when it launched the ground offensive. So it was impossible for us to get down to Rafah, to get down to Khan Yunis, and see what was happening in the south. So we were relying on a lot of our stringers, producers, information they were giving us real time via the internet. So it played a very important role in that sense. The internet changed how war reporting is done as a result of this particular conflict.
And
I wonder if you could talk about it, address the backstory of the reason for the war on Gaza. I had heard that there was some kind of discovery of natural gas off of Gaza, and this was a pretext. The war was a pretext for seizing, perhaps, some of the natural gas rights or mineral rights, or maybe there's other reasons for the war that you might have perceived that you might be able to address.
Well, the question about natural gas and resources, the only thing I would say to that is Israel already controls all of the territorial waters off of the coast of Gaza. I don't think they would need the pretext of a war to be able to take what they already control. Gaza is a territory still very much under Israel military occupation. They may not have a military presence inside Gaza, and they have withdrawn the settlers. But by no means are the entry points into Gaza free. The airspace is not free. The territorial waters off of Gaza are not free for the fishermen to fish, or for any organization or company to pursue developing those natural resources. So I personally wouldn't subscribe to that philosophy. I mean, we know that gas has existed off the coast of Gaza, and there have been, there was, I think, when Yasser Arafat was around, there was a refinery that was supposedly built and was supposed to be functioning at some point. But I don't know, I haven't heard that particular theory. The backstory behind the war is really going to depend on who you ask. You ask the Israelis, and they will tell you they've been living under a barrage of rocket fire for the past 8 years, and something needed to be done.
But we know that wasn't true prior to the war.
Well, that's certainly the counter argument, and people who follow this very closely will tell you that since Hamas took power in Gaza, since it won what was widely described as free and democratic elections, this showdown was somewhat coming, and this has been in motion for several months, if not years, in advance to December 27th. This is a long-term conflict, and the backstory of the war on Gaza cannot be excluded from the larger Palestinian-Israeli conflict. You can't look at the war in Gaza and say it is just a war of security for Israel's security. You can't look at